effect. Like Morris.
No more room in hell. The dead will walk here.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to Three Corners of Horror on Horror Fiend TV. If this is your first time, I am Joe, the psychologist, and normally it's three of us. Rick, due to technical difficulties, will not be joining us tonight, but I got my little brother here, JR. How you doing? You ready to talk about another one from our childhood?
Yeah, I don't know which ones. After seeing this one, I kind of wish I would go back and watch E.T. to watch Drew Barrymore really do a good job.
Oh no, so we have another one of these episodes where the two brothers might be against each other. Well, for this episode, we are going to be discussing the 1984, yes, 40 years ago, the movie Firestarter came out. And the movie was directed by Mark L. Lester, written by Stanley Mann, and it is based on Stephen King's Firestarter. It stars David Keith as Andy McGee, Martin Sheen as Captain James Hollister, George C. Scott as John Rainbird, and the lovable Drew Barrymore as Charlie McGee. So basically, if you haven't watched this movie, I guess I'll give a little brief description here. But Andy is on the run with his daughter, Charlie. They are on the run from a company called The Shop. It's basically a scientific research company from the government, out of all places, of course, that had done some experiments on people. And now Andy and Charlie are on the run from them. But before we really dive into it, because again, when we started the year, JR and I were here for Warlock and discussed that throughout this year, there's a lot of horror movies that are celebrating some big milestones. Firestarter's 40 years ago. I mean, shit. So 40 years ago, I was 12. How old were you?
Oh, Jesus Christ. I was, well, 8, going on 9.
Oh shit, we were really little. I guess you were kind of Charlie's age when this movie came out.
I wish I had her powers.
Oh, me too. Um, but yeah, so again, we're going to be discussing these movies that are hitting these big milestones. For some people, it's basically for me, which was I'm worried because I obviously watched these with him, so he threw a little dig in there. But for me, it's childhood. I mean, this is one of the first horror movies that I watched, and we had on the last episode Brian, who said gateway horror. This was kind of one of my gateway horror movies, because again, I was 12, you were 8. It's gonna be see if we can actually remember from that long ago. But for most of these movies, you and I pretty much watched these ones together, which was great growing up with, having a brother that both of us, just used to sit there and watch these movies. But I mean, do you like remember when you first watched it? Is it another one that you've seen a couple of times, throughout the years?
Oh, I remember watching it because, the 80s were Stephen King.
Yep.
So, every time a Stephen King film came out, myself and you and, the general audience always flocked to the theaters to watch these films. Is it one that I've watched a lot over the years? Not really, because when you watch it, let's say in the last 10 years or so, with all the horror movies coming out, it's one that doesn't age too well. And even we'll talk later when they thought about, reimagining it, didn't work out too well either. But it's one of these films where, like, when we were kids watching it, we we liked because at the time it has some really good characters. We were into comics at a young age, so lo and behold, people with superpowers, so it added more of a curiosity to it. And like if you ever collected X-Men, or you always knew there was a villain who wanted to either to wipe them out or take or use their powers for military reasons. Lo and behold, military once again. But yeah, I mean, it's one that would I watch again? Probably not, but it's one that it's not one of the top tier of the Stephen King films that came out at that time.
All right. See, and for me, it's just it is a little bit different because I guess I'm a little bit older than you, and everything you kind of just said is pretty much the same. We were into comics. This to normal Stephen King horror standards isn't there as far as the standard. This is more. This is when he delved a little bit more into sci-fi horror. So the horror in here is actually the people that were behind everything, that the reason that Charlie got her powers and Andy got their powers. So for a lot of the casual horror viewers, some of them have brushed this off as not seeing it as horror. But again, horror doesn't necessarily have to have slashers, have to have all that. Sometimes, the horror here was experiments were done on these characters. So X-Men, I was the X-Men collector, and you had a child, and so wait, 84. So I was 12. So yeah, you would have probably been Charlie's age. I can't New Mutants were out. So it showed a little kid with powers. Because you made the little comment, and I'll save it also for the end. For me, I like Drew's performance in it. It shows the innocence that she personified in the character, and not wanting to use her powers. Because think about it. Can you imagine if me and you had the power of pyrokinesis? What would have
Oh my
happened?
god.
Like,
Yeah.
mom would have gotten a whole lot of fucking phone calls because we would have been thrown out of schools. Whereas Charlie didn't want to use it because she was actually afraid of what she can do. That's horror.
Yeah.
Think about it. You're a child, and now at a very young age, you have the responsibility of keeping in what is a really fucking cool power. And it's not just the fire, she can see a little bit towards the future. And I forget, isn't there a Marvel or DC character that could basically, because what she can do, I want to say it's like maybe a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes.
Electra could do in the Daredevil comics. Electra had that ability where she
Electra.
could see.
So yeah, it's similar to that. She can see just a little bit ahead. It's not like she can foresee it, for in a few days somebody's going to show up. No, it's literally you got a couple seconds from here to do something about it. And I've watched this movie a lot. Like whenever we watched it again, I enjoyed it. A lot of it is the nostalgia in horror, because it's I'm gonna Brian, thank you for the terminology because I'm going to use it. It's a great way. It's definitely much better than elevated horror. But gateway horror. This was another one that back then, and I read Stephen King's books. Obviously there's some difference between the movies and the books. It's not the most beloved interpretation. However, it is the nostalgia for most of the horror fans who like this movie, who watch it. If you have children, this probably would be a movie, especially a little girl. If you have a little girl, a daughter, like you want to show her this, a little girl who is strong enough to not want to use her powers. Because honestly, can you imagine if she would have been around during these times, and you would have taken her iPad away from her? you you would have had to have a
Phone, anything,
hazmat suit, like walk in with like tongs, like, all right, honey, phone time's over. Please don't burn me, But
fire extinguisher in your hand.
exactly, like, so for me, it's still it because it's one of those that were one of my first ones. It still kind of has a soft spot for me, and Drew Barrymore, pretty much being our age, it was a child. We were kind of kids, and it involved a horror movie with a kid. So before we talk Charlie, let's talk about the shop. They are the Department of Scientific Intelligence. I guess the government created this group, and what they actually had done was experimented on young college, probably, people who nobody, no, their family didn't love them, kind of one of those, are you still talking to your family? No. Okay, you're a perfect candidate. And this is where we meet Andy and Vicky, played by Heather Locklear. I mean, most people from the 80s and the 90s at least know who she is. Melrose Place. The experiments had given them both the telepathic abilities, and now their product had some form of telepathic abilities and the pyrokinesis, and the shop is after them, which basically what the whole movie is really about is that they're trying to escape this company, the government, who created them and is now hounding a little child, and it's a father trying to protect them. So yeah, so they're running from the shop, and you have James Hollister, the captain, you have Rainbird, you have the doctor, Pinshot. These are all characters with ulterior motives left and right. So, who did you think, for whichever reason, either, they were villainous or they were actually inept, either way you want to look, who to you was one of the worst members of the shop?
To be honest, Martin Sheen's a good actor, and this was coming off of I think Apocalypse. Now was a couple of years prior to this, so you have this guy who he's an intense actor. He's great for what he does, but Martin Sheen does not play a very good villain when it comes to films that have to do with superhero or superpowers, aka Spawn. So
Shout out.
the problem is that if you're the guy who's in charge of this secret government department, which is kind of in a way based off, I mean, a little history here in the 1940s, the Department of Defense actually was searching for people with abilities.
Yep.
So, especially telepathic psychic abilities, because
Yep.
they wanted to pinpoint exactly where Hitler was hiding.
Yep. Very
So,
true. The
there's a
psychologist does know
possibility,
that.
this thing still exists somewhere. But for somebody to be the head of that department, it should have been a little bit more ruthless. Shouldn't have had that much compassion. And the fact that he didn't strike me as somebody who I would be scared of, especially if Rainbird is your right hand, then you should be more ruthless than Rainbird, but you weren't. And the fact is that he told this line where it wasn't believable to me that this guy is the boss, especially with, like I said, a character like Rainbird. And I would have rather had him push this little girl to her limits. Basically, you know, I'm going to hurt your dad, or your dad's not going to survive if you don't do this. And he wasn't believable as a villain. And I wish that they would have either pushed him a little bit more or give him I mean, I know it's based off a Stephen King book, but you could alter certain characters,
Yeah.
especially to be more believable. Now, in every film we've watched where you had a guy who is the head of a department like this, they're cutthroat, ruthless. They don't care about who they hurt. They just want results. And the results they wanted from her is show us the extent of your ability and let's see how much we could push you. And he just didn't come off as somebody who, you would fear.
I completely agree. I know you guys probably would have thought Rainbird was our choice. I wish Rick was here because he would have discussed Rainbird. I know he would have. But I agree with you. Hollister, for me, because he did not exude the power that he had. And it seemed he celebrated his wins. And then when the shit was hitting the fan, he didn't know what the fuck to do.
Yeah.
And then, you know, because Andy ended up using his powers on him, shows you, because the more susceptible people were easier for him. And I know Andy was not taking the medications. That again shows you that Hollister should have had cameras constantly recording and seeing that at some point in time, he would have noticed that Andy was actually spitting them out and not taking them. So Martin Sheen's character, like he was supposed to be the bad guy. Rainbird is the bad guy, in the movie. I honestly, because I don't want to everybody knows the controversy, especially later and now, of George C. Scott being cast as Rainbird because Rainbird was supposed to be Native American. Again, when you watched this movie when you were 8, 9, or 12, you weren't thinking about any of that. And even now, when I watch it, even though I always had known that because I've read the book, we saw the remake and they corrected that mistake. George C. Scott still did a great role. I mean, literally, that's the person who taught me that if you hit the nose in a right certain angle, you can send the nose particles into the brain and kill the person. Like, holy shit. The scene when he just walks in and does it to the guy to show you that he doesn't have to do a whole lot.
Yeah.
One hit and I can fucking kill you. Shows you somebody who doesn't have powers was just as strong. Whereas Hollister, if he would have, as you said, had that drive, had been I could be just as ruthless as Rainbird. I'm not doing it. I'd rather let somebody else get their hands dirty. But if I got to get my hands dirty, I can fucking get my hands dirty. And he didn't. And that's why, for me, he was the worst one. Same thing, because they didn't push the limit of him. They should have shown him. And actually, a little part that I'll continue at the end was that, for me, the catalyst would have been, as you said, him pushing Charlie and having a face-to-face with Charlie and him going, you wanted to see what I can do? Here it is. And again, I'm sorry, Steven, I'm not trying to rewrite your book. It's as when we're watching these movies, and especially get older, and we've got somebody here who's a writer, and you look at things a certain way, a final confrontation, having made Hollister actually be more imposing and scary. And then that one moment for her, before we talk about all this right now, for her to go, you wanted to see what I can do, here it is. Because the whole movie was Charlie holding this back, and the shop wanted to push it forward.
Yeah.
And they manipulated her with Rainburn becoming her friend, manipulated Andy. They finally talked. And for me, I mean, I was trying to think some of the mutants that you can think Charlie as, and I came up with Sunfire, Sunspot. Is there anybody else that you can think of?
Pyro.
But see, Pyro kind of needed a source to create his fire.
But he was sadistic, which
he was sadistic. But however, all these other individuals can pull it from them.
Yeah, Human Torch.
Thank you. So, what did you think of Charlie's powers? And most of all, because again, this is all pre-CGI. I know for the most part, you're not a fan of most of the movies. We kind of mentioned this when we did the remake of Firestarter. The takedown of the fucking shop is actually the best part of this movie.
Yeah.
So, what'd you think of Charlie's powers and the takedown of the fucking shop?
Well, I like the fact that, throughout the whole film, she had to control it. And I think that's one of the aspects that gets lost in this film, is the fact that you had a child who's not given the opportunity to be a child. And she's constantly being told she has to control herself. And once she takes down the shop, I'm sorry, I mean, those fireballs that look like freaking comets were badass.
They were. Thank you. I really thought you were gonna, because I'm sitting there going, all right, I'm sure other fans feel the same way. But like even the fireballs were badass.
Yeah.
I don't care who you. So I was worried that you were at the end going to go, oh, the fireballs. Now that I rewatched it again, they kind of sucked. No, those fireballs were because that's when she showed where her fucking power was.
Yeah, she showed what she can create out of nothing.
Fucking
Because she
comments.
created them in the air, and the fact that, I mean, here you have in '84 this badass scene where this little girl is basically producing fireballs, and then fast forward years later where you actually have to CGI for it, you can't even make it work.
It looked horrible.
They look so terrible in the fact that, I mean, here you have a girl who witnessed her father's death, and just that this was the tipping point for her to go all out and take everybody out. And you know what I would have wished they would have did in the remake is make it 10 times more violent to really show her true power. Because even though we see her power when she's taking down the shop, in the back of your mind, you're still thinking, all right, she's done. She hasn't hit her full extent yet. She's still holding back. And I would have loved to see just her go full nuclear. I mean, just blow everything up, blow every building up. But yeah, the takedown shot was good. I mean, those special effects still are better than the special effects of the remake.
By miles. We reviewed the remake. Go check it out. We totally torched that motherfucker. But because it looked for me, and even now when I watch it, it's like she's shooting comets. It's a rock. It's either comets or lava, however you want to look at it. But the background that we're using right now, I would have liked to seen her go full Phoenix Force.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden you see the fire around her, and still keep it to the comics, because that's one of the better parts of the movie on the use of her power. So I would not change that.
No.
If somebody goes to remake this, please kind of keep that part and kind of still make it look like it looked back then, because that was much better than the remake.
If they go like full Thanos when he brought the freaking moon down like that, and it's all comments like that, that'd be badass.
That's what I'm saying. Like it was at that time one of the first on-screen mutant movies you got to see, because you were reading the comic books, and now this movie comes out with the child having the power of pyrokinesis, and you're seeing it on the big screen. And when you're that young and you have that kind of imagination, this is what it would have looked like when you saw it. So I loved the special effects of the takedown in the shop. I just loved how you can see that Charlie in that moment, because every time that Adam pisses me off, I always go, back off. And then he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm not talking to you, I'm talking about me. I'm literally going, back off, like I don't want to explode on you. And she just went full on. And yeah, you did only get to really see the members getting burned up, flying through the air. Yes, in a remake, you want to see, like, when that fucking fireball hits them, the person go torched up. Don't go super CGI and make it look really bad. But it was, again, we're talking about 1984. You mentioned Thanos taking down the moon. That's like millions of dollars in special effects that went into play. And this one scene, well, not even one, it's a long scene, because the takedown is pretty long as she's walking through the whole facility and just burning it all down. It's a great way for the movie to end, for her to take this all down, because she kind of made sure that she can now go be a child, and that the shop is not going to be coming after her again. Now, in the remake, so much more could be done, because what I found, and we'll go into the closing right now. I'll go to you, but what I still find about this movie over the remake is that they made the remake Charlie be an angsty child, whereas Drew personified the innocence
Mhm.
of a child through. And even as you watch, as she's taking it all down, and you see that it's a child that's being forced to do this, whereas the remake just didn't give that essence in it. So, what are your closing thoughts on it? Obviously, give us the rate.
This one, I mean, compared to the remake, and I gave the remake the lowest score I've ever given a film that we have reviewed. I think it was 0.5, which is the lowest rating ever. I think we've done so far. But, you know, where the remake had an opportunity was I did like that character change as far as Charlie kind of wanting to control her powers, wanting to show off her powers. They could have went a different, more horror route to it, but the fact that the 1984 one feels like it's more horror than the remake
Yep.
is bad.
Yep.
I mean, you had plenty of opportunities. This one here, I mean, how would I remake it? I would still keep the innocent character, but I would
Yes.
have the personification of her power appear like another little girl, but in flames.
Like Phoenix. That's why I had mentioned the Phoenix.
Yeah.
Because either if you want to go the Fox version, that the Phoenix Force was just an alternate version of Jean, whereas you have when she actually, you have the innocence, but you push us to a certain point, the personality that controls the pyrokinesis comes out. That's a great little spin
No.
on that.
Yeah.
I
We'll
agree.
have her when she's saying back off, she's actually talking to the personality, not talking to whoever's around her. But I mean, this film still has potentials to be rated properly if it has a good. I mean, Stephen King. I'm not trying to rewrite your story. I'm not, but take your story and take it to another level to bring a more horror aspect to it of a child who's trying to be a child, not given the opportunity to be a child, and basically all hell breaks loose when this persona inside her finally comes out. So as far as rating goes, this is for me still not one of the top Stephen King films that was done because it's the 80s. I mean, we watched, freaking Cat's Eye,
It
Creep
was great in Cat's Eye
Show.
too. I
This
loved
is
her in Cat's Eye.
so many movies that were out there, Stephen King based, and this one it felt like you had all the potential there, but the performance weren't up to par with what could have been an actually great film. And sorry, Martin Sheen, you're a good actor. It's not a good villain in any movie that has to do with
Yeah.
superpowers. Stay away from superpower films. But yeah, I mean, and the Rainbow character, great villain. Um, he should have probably been, the guy in charge of the whole thing, to be honest. Because then you could have spent a different life because the fact that, he wanted her power, which is a good twist on the Rainbow character, in which they kind of fell off
Here,
on the remake of it.
yeah, because here he wanted to end it. He knew
Yeah,
he knew he knew what she can do. So he didn't he's just like, all right, after we're done, I'm just gonna kill her because this girl
yeah,
can take down the world.
yeah. Which they should have built that a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, overall, I'm gonna give it a 2.5. I mean, I'm not gonna go any lower because the remake just boosted this one up tenfold. But yeah, I mean, if you haven't watched it, watch it. Appreciate it for what it is. See if you agree with us. I mean, if you agree, it could be remade at a lot better than the remake. Don't even watch the remake. Don't waste your time.
Yeah, don't waste your time.
But Drew Barrymore is still a very lovable character. She's still, I mean, her charisma, personification, who she is as a person, shows in this movie. And yeah, I mean, it's 2.5. Stephen King, sorry. I think you could have pushed a little bit harder to make it right, but
Well, he wasn't involved. Remember that.
that's what I'm
They
saying.
yeah,
He should
he,
have involved himself in it
yeah,
because this could have been one of your better story to film movies ever.
all right. I'm gonna give it a 3. I know as much as I say that I love it, I'm in a lot of agreement with what you say. The holding up is a lot more different. A lot of mine has to do with the nostalgia. And it does, because like, again, I watched this with you. I watched, P Rockzilla Berto might not remember that he was also, when we watched most of these movies, we watched it together. So there's like the nostalgia that I saw these movies with my siblings. Drew's portrayal still for me, because it personified the innocence of a child having to be restrained. And the remake, I didn't like the way that Charlie was actually portrayed. George C. Scott was a great villain. Like I said, when his ultimate plan at the end was that I'm just going to hit her, send the particles in her nose and kill her. That's it. We're done. But he was and this is like kind of a driving force in a lot of the X-Men comic books, where you have a human with no powers realizing the potential of destruction that somebody can have, that they just want to put a stop to it before they can kill the rest of us.
Cameron
And
Hodge.
huh?
Cameron Hodge.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Cameron Hodge. Good dude, good shout out. Like Rainbird was Cameron Hodge in here. He's the bad guy, but he's actually trying to look out for us, because there's this child that can literally fucking nuclear the world if she goes full on, Dark Phoenix on us. So yeah, I mean the remake, man, when we did the review for that remake, the one thing I was looking forward to was, yes, the fact that we now have the technology and the CGI to give us, a great view of the powers, and it didn't deliver. And we even said it didn't have the biggest shoes to fill.
Mm.
And the original one still remains the biggest shoes to fill at this point. And they're not even big shoes. I'm an 11 in my shoes. This is a fucking 7. So but still, check it out. If you're a Stephen King fan, you have to put it in there. No, it does not fall to the standard horror. That's why we did this episode too, is to explain to you guys that some horror actually involves on the machinations that are going on, and then trying to capture and use these people that you created, which is in a lot of our superhero stuff. So I still love this movie. When I rewatched it for this, I sat there and was just like, I still enjoy it.
Yeah.
Is it the greatest? No. But is it far superior than the remake? Yes. So, any last words, JR?
No, that's it, man.
All right. So, as Rick would say, we all cheer for big bottles of beer. But I would tell you guys, ta-ta for now.